All right, we're continuing our study here of the Chatzar Yosef, chapter 15, section 2. Now, we're in the middle of a deep topic. We started talking about a lot of deep concepts. Let's just read the Gemara as we usually do, the short Gemara there, and then jump into our analysis. Of course, we're starting the depths of Masechet Gittin. This particular story appears around page 57 in Masechet Gittin. It's right after the beginning of the introduction of the war that destroyed the city of Beitar. It was a Jewish settlement, a very glorious city, a very high-level city, as we explained in previous videos. Please look over there. We're in chapter 15, section 1, we talked about that. Then the Gemara says the following thing. Once the Romans decided to wage war against this city, Jewish city of Beitar, the Gemara says the following. It quotes a pasuk from Echa, which is very fitting because Echa is the book that we read on Tisha B'Av, and if nothing much changes in the world, that's going to be next week, Tisha B'Av, a week from today actually. So it says the following, Gada b'chori av kol keren Yisrael. The prophet Jeremiah says in that verse, in Echa 2:2, that he has cut off in his anger all the horns, or the horn of Israel. We start talking about this word horn, keren, kuf resh nun sofid. That's really the central idea of this chapter, because it has a lot of interconnected meanings. That's what we were talking about. The Gemara says further, Amar Rabbi Zera, Amar Rabbi Abahu, Amar Rabbi Yohanan. This verse refers to Shmonim Elef Karnei Melchama, the 80,000 horns of war shenichnesu lichrach Beitar, that entered into the city of Beitar from the Roman legions, Roman troops. B'she'ah shelachdua, at the time when they entered the city to wage war. And they killed in it men, women, and children, says the Gemara, until their blood went and fell into the Yam HaGadol, the Great Sea. Lest you say that the city was close to the sea, so it's not such a big deal, you should know, says the Gemara, that it was away from the sea at least the distance of a mil, which is about 1 kilometer. That's the language of the Gemara. Very short, but a lot of questions. What's the whole thing of 80,000? What is this whole thing about a war, about the horns? What does horns represent? What does it mean? Rashi explained the following. Rashi said that these 80,000 horns of war represents the 80,000 groups or legions, troops of the Roman army that entered. Right? They would always blow horns, trumpets, in order to instill fear in the enemy and to gather themselves together and organize themselves. That's the simple explanation according to Rashi. But we started talking about how these horns represent something much deeper. They're talking about certain energies, powers. That the word keren for horn has a lot of different meanings, right? The horn represents something beyond the body. So we're talking about its connection to tefillin, its connection to the idea of 8. 8 represents beyond the physical limit. 7 represents the physical world and all of its facets. 8 is the step above it, beyond it, reaching into the deeper realms, the realms of thought and planning and seed. That is the power of the 8, as we'll see here in this chapter. That's why it's 80,000. That's what the Gemara says, 80,000 horns of war, to hint to that. So we left off on page 233. We brought up a midrash. Let's read the midrash quickly as well in English. I'll read it again. I brought a midrash from Echa that's connected to this verse. It says, he has cut off in his anger all the horn of Israel. He cut off a certain horn from Am Yisrael because of their sin that led to the destruction of the temple. What is this horn talking about in this verse? The midrash says there are 10 horns. In general, the horn of Abraham, the horn of Yitzchak, the horn of Yosef, the horn of Moshe, the horn of Torah, the horn of priesthood, Kehunah, the horn of Levites, the horn of prophecy, the horn of the temple, the horn of Israel. There are those who say there's an 11th horn. What is that? The horn of Mashiach. And all of these were placed on the heads of Israel, says the Midrash. And once they sinned, they were taken from them. These horns, these powers were taken from Am Yisrael. That is that which is written when it says the pasuk we just quoted in Echa. He has cut off in his anger all the horn of Israel, referring to God cutting off the horns of Israel. And they were given to other nations of the world, says the Midrash. And then Israel makes teshuvah, when? And when Israel makes teshuvah, the Holy One, blessed be He, which means God, will restore them back to their place. This is that which is written in another verse when it says, all the horns of the wicked I will cut, but the horns of the righteous shall be lifted up high. That's a verse in Tehillim, 75:11. The horns that He cut from the righteous ones of the world, when will He restore them back to their place? Asks the Midrash. When the Holy One, blessed be He, Hashem, will raise up high the horn of His Mashiach. That's when everything will go back in this place. As it is written in another verse in Shmuel, it says, and He will give His might to His king, which refers to Mashiach, who will be king, and He will raise up the horn of His Mashiach. That's Shmuel Aleph 2:10. Now we begin to analyze this midrash. Anytime we find Chazal, which means Chachamim, the sages of blessed memory, anytime they teach us a set of 10, which happens a lot throughout the holy writings, we must be thinking about the most central template of 10. 10 is such an important number in human existence. What is that? The 10 emanations of light that cause reality, that we call the Sefirot, the spheres. This is the central idea of almost all of Kabbalah. The word keren, which means a horn, kuf, resh, nun, sofit, 3 letters, it has several related meanings. One of them is a beam of light, which we mentioned last week. Right? Look at note number 4. I bring you the source. Exodus or Shemot 34:29. The pasuk says, "For light karan," which means beamed from the skin of his face, regarding Moshe upon his descension from Mount Sinai. We talked about this light that beamed from his face. The word used to describe that beam of light is karan, which is the word keren, which is horn. Thus, the 10 horns listed in the midrash that we just read correlate to one of these sefirot. Anytime you have a list of 10 in any place in Torah, you should know it's somehow connected to the 10 sefirot. And how is that? Note number 5, I gave you, I didn't go through each one because it's hard to sometimes pinpoint, it's hard to connect the dots, which one is which. But some of them are obvious. What are the obvious ones? I brought you in note 5. The horn of Avraham is chesed, for sure, because Avraham is the power of chesed. He's the epitome of chesed. Right, the power of giving. I can't always go back and introduce these ideas. You have to go back in previous videos because that's where we talked about all these things. In section 1 of this chapter, we talked about the 3 central ones of Chesed, Din, and Rachamim. I don't want to keep repeating myself and sound redundant. So please do your homework. Go back, and then come back to this. Anyway, the horn of Abraham is Chesed. The horn of Yitzchak that the Midrash refers to is Din, Gevurah, judgment. That's Sfirah. And the horn of Torah is definitely Rachamim and Tiferet, because Torah is correlated with Yaakov Avinu, and Yaakov is the middle, which is Tiferet between Abraham and Yitzchak. It's also called Rachamim, it's also called Emet, truth. That's those simple correlations. So back here in the main text, and these Sefirot are characterized by beams of light emanating from the point of Hashem's infinite state. All these horns are different avenues of achieving what we call transcendence, which is a very borrowed term, in English, but it's the closest thing. But this word is a big buzzword in this whole chapter, transcendence, okay? In fact, the name of this chapter, which I haven't mentioned until now, this whole chapter 15, is what we call transcending Beitar. That's the name I gave it, with the Roman numeral 1 after it. Why? Because it's only part 1. There's going to be future chapters that go back to Beitar, and I call it Transcending Beitar 2. So this is Transcending Beitar. What is transcendence? It's such a fancy word, and honestly it's hard to spell. I know because I tried to spell it many times writing this book. But transcendence means to go beyond the physical limit. To go beyond what you ever thought is capable or possible. And specifically in a metaphysical sense. That's what metaphysics means. Meta means beyond. Physics means physics. So metaphysics means beyond the physical state, right? Beyond what is contained in obvious physical existence. So again, we're talking about spirituality, reaching into the worlds that are above us, that are closer to God, right? Because there's a chain-like breakdown of worlds from the most closest to God to the furthest away. We're in the most bottom one. right? So transcendence is trying to reach back up and connect back to the source on a very high spiritual level. That's basically what transcendence is. And Beitar, as we said before, they were very successful in doing that. Their society was based on this, on transcending, right? That's why the minhag they had, and that we talked about in section 1, where they had the trees. Every time a boy was born, they planted a certain tree that represented maleness, chesed. Anytime a female was born, they planted a certain tree that represented femaleness. And when a couple would get married, they would take their respective trees that were growing since they were born and make chuppah. These are all ideas connecting to the sefirot. So they're trying to transcend. And these horns, like we said, are different avenues, sefirot, avenues, to achieve transcendence. As the Maharal wrote an explanation of the word, in connection of the word keren to the number 8, we said last week, which represents transcending beyond the physical. The number 8 is also that number that shows you that idea, because we said 7, the sefirot are divided. There's 10 sefirot, 10 horns, 10 emanations of light. They're divided into general categories of top 3 and lower 7. The top 3 are the thought realm, lower 7 are the actualization. And actualization is the physical world. So those 7 are the physical world. Going beyond the 7 would be 8. And many times the top 3 are viewed as sort of one mini unit, as the 8th, so to speak, unit. So the 8th is above that lower 7. Number 8 represents this idea of transcendence. To strengthen the connection, we may observe that the mispar katan gematria of course is the mathematical system in Torah where each letter represents a number. And there's many different ways of doing it. One way is called mispar katan, which means little number. What's little number? That means any letter that has a big gematria, drop the zeros, and that will be the gematria of that number. So the examples, for example, the letter kuf is 100, mispar katan would just be 1, you drop the ones. The letter resh is 200, mispar katan would be 2, and so on and so forth. Nun is 50, mispar katan will be 5, right? So if you take the words keren, kuf, resh, nun, what's the gematria of each letter? Kuf is 100. What's the mispar katan? Drop the 100. 1. Then resh is 200. Mispar katan, 2. 1 plus 2 is 3. Nun is 50. Take out the 0, 5. 3 plus 5 is, of course, the number 8. And the number 8, again, is the 8th, is hinting at that 8th element of transcendence beyond the physical. Even the opinion in the midrash here that there's an 11th horn. How do we explain that? Is there an 11th sephira? How do we explain that? Right? And we said that opinion said it's specifically referring to the sephira, horn, I should say, of Mashiach. The midrash said the 11th horn will be the horn of Mashiach. What's that speaking of? It's a deeper concept. There's a concept commonly used in gematria as well. It's called the concept of the kolel, which means the includer, the all-inclusive, so to speak. Where the number that is greater by, where the number that is greater by 1 than the total sum of the parts plays the role of unifying all the parts together into one unit. In other words, give me a word in Hebrew. Abba. Abba, father. How do you spell it? Aleph, bet, aleph. 1 plus 2 plus 1. Simple math. Gematria of that word is 4. But that word in gematria, concept would also be connected in ways to the number 5. Meaning you take the overall number, which would be 4 in this case, the total sum, plus 1, you add 1. What's that 1 represent? The 1 represents the word. The combination of the word together. That 1, the unit. That's called kolel. That's called the includer. And in gematria it's used all the time. And here, that idea is being used in our midrash as well. It says there's 10 horns, but there's an 11th. That 11th represents all 10 together. It shows that all the parts are pieces of an overall whole, which is necessary since each individual piece is not nearly as meaningful by itself when it is not part of the whole. It is the fundamental that the Mashiach's prime purpose will be to reunify all parts of existence, to make it one again with Hashem, back into the oneness from which everything originated, from God. This includes the 10 Sefirot, since they too propagate out of one common point, which is the infinite state of Hashem's oneness, what we call the Ein Sof, the literally means no end, the unknowable, unfathomable, infinite oneness of God. From there is where the 10 Sefirot, the first separation of things from that oneness are the 10 emanations, the Sefirot, the lights. So that's basically the first step away from God, so to speak. Thus, the Midrash is saying that the horn of the Mashiach is the 11th horn, one above 10, because it will play the role of the Kolel. When Mashiach comes, he will reunify all existence, all the beams of light, all the 10 Sefirot into the original oneness. Okay. Now, to understand the Maharal deeper, the Maharal is the one that just gave us the idea of the number 8 here, how it represents going beyond, transcendence. We must explain first that the 10 Sefirot are split into two general categories, which I mentioned before, called the upper 3 and the lower 7. Upper 3 are Keter, Chochmah, Binah, lower 7 are Chesed, Din, Rachamim, Nesach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchut. The upper 3 is the realm of something from nothing, of intellect and thought, inception and planned development, what we might call the inner world. That's the upper 3. The lower 7 Sefirot, however, dictate and cause all aspects of the physical world. This is why the physical, sensible world is governed and controlled by factors of 7, if you look around you. Such as one of the basic units of time, for example, worldwide is what? The 7-day week. You ever wonder why does the whole world follow a 7-day week? It's such an uneven number. What's the point of 7? Why couldn't it be? It would have been much cleaner if the week had 5 days. There's 365 days of the solar year. Everything would be equally divisible. Every month would have the same amount of days. It would be so nice. Why 7? Because again, it goes back to the most basic unit of all existence, which is the creation. God created the world in 7 days, on a unit of 7. That's what started everything off. Why is that? Even if you dig even further back to the original seed and source, it's because of the lower 7 Sefirot that govern the physical world. Another powerful example is that there are specifically 7 colors of visible light sensible to us that you can see. You can only see a spectrum of 7 colors of light, 7 wavelengths of light. Right? So what you learn in the first grade, Roy G. Biv. Red, orange, yellow, green, indigo, violet. Indigo is like a bluish purple, and then violet is like a reddish purple.
Ultraviolet.
Right.
Beyond number 8.
Right, which we can't see. We can't see ultraviolet. Can we? Infrared we can't see. I think ultraviolet we can. I'm not sure. Infrared we can't see. That's even smaller. That's on this side. That's on this side. Right. Infrared is below the red, and ultraviolet is beyond the violet. That's how it goes. So learning the science behind this is just amazing. Like it just solidifies your understanding of God, I think, to that much more, and appreciation of Him, of His amazing genius and wisdom that we can't even fathom. Right. The way it works is each light moves in waves. The photons, the particles of light, which are barely even tangible, they move in waves. And depending on how large those waves are, that's what we call the wavelength. Wavelength is the distance of how much it's moving from up to down, because it's constantly going back and forth. Right? So the smaller it is, that's red, and violet is the biggest one, I believe. It goes from small to big. Yes, I believe. Check me on that. But I believe the red is the smallest one, the violet is the biggest one, and it goes like that. So anything less than that, you won't see. That's other wavelengths of that. That's microwaves, and there's also X-rays somewhere on the spectrum, and there's infrared, which is even less than red. Infra means smaller, I believe. And then anything beyond the biggest that you can see, which is the violet, you won't see either. They're there, they can affect the world around you, you can measure them, but your eyes can't measure them. Okay? Now here's the other thing. When you see something that's a certain color, what happens is that there's light reflecting off that thing and going into your eyes. and then your brain interprets it. So, for example, we have the white light, which contains all 7 colors in them. White light is a combination of all 7 all 7 colors that we mentioned. Roy G. Biv, all those wavelengths are in white. When there was, meaning, in other words, if I have 7 different colors, light colors, I have a red light flashing, beaming. I have a blue light, indigo, violet, all the 7, and they point at one spot. What am I going to see in that one spot? White. It's a combination of all of them. So when the white light hits something, this coffee cup, which is sort of orangish, and it reflects into my eyes, what does that mean? How does that work? That means that this material, this cardboard and this paint that they put on top of it, the paint absorbs all of the spectrums of light, colors of light, that this is not. And it reflects what I see. So this is orange color. It reflects that orange color, that light, into my eye, and that's why I see that. It absorbs the rest and reflects. So whatever color it is, it doesn't mean it is that color. It actually means it's reflecting that color. It is actually, if you want to call it is, or it's absorbing all the other colors, which is the sort of tiny hint in the world of how don't rely so much on your eyes, because your eyes are actually seeing the inverse of the whole world.
Also, isn't the image upside down?
That's another thing. Your brain first captures the image upside down, and then it adjusts it in your occipital lobe in the back of your head over there, back of your brain. It reiterates it. But yes, the image is captured upside down, which is another whole. Also contributes to this idea that you see, again, don't think the world, is as you see it. There's a famous Gemara that says, Olam Hafuch, that a certain rabbi went to, one of the Chachamim, I forgot who it was, he went to Olam Haba, he had a dream. Oh no, he had a death experience. He had a full, what we call clinical death. One of the Chachamim, I think it was Rav Huna, I don't remember who. He had a clinical death. They brought him back to life, and they asked him, what did you see? He says, Olam Hafuch, I saw an upside down world in Olam Haba. That whoever's downtrodden in this world is praised up there. Whoever's praised here is downtrodden there, the reverse. Right? So same idea over here. You see the world upside down. The opposite of what it actually is. But I digress. Back over here. We're talking about 7. You see 7 units of light, 7 spectrums, 7 wavelengths of light. That's all you can see. That's how God designed the world. And also, there are specifically 7 notes of the octave that are audible, that is audible to us. 7 specific notes. And what we call the octave. Octave, of course, has the word oct in it, and oct means 8. So you're going to tell me it's not 7, it's 8. So the answer is, Rabbi Tatz brings it down in his book as well, and many of his lectures, that the last note in an octave is actually the same as the first one. It's just symmetrical. So how does it go again? Do, re, mi, fa, so, something, and something, and then
Do, re, mi, fa, so,
la, ti, and then the end is do again. So, and it's the same note. It's just a mountain. It's just a climax. The first and last are the same. So it's really 7. It's the same note. You can have different keys, right? Different pitches, but the note is the same. So the 7 notes. And the upper 3, so back over here. So again, everything you hear and see in the world is based and connected to the 7 Sefirot, because that is what dictates the world, the physical world. That's what affects and manifests the physical world. The upper 3, however, the upper 3 Sefirot that we talked about, can only be accessed by transcending the physical, going beyond the physical, beyond the empirical numbers and data. These upper 3 are often considered to be as one unit, as the 8th general element, like we said before, beyond physical boundaries of the lower 7. Yes, this is also from the Mishneh Hilchot Habrit, which is an important Kabbalistic source. Hence, where are we? Let's try to finish this page here. Hence, the people of Beitar, they were especially good at using these horns or beams or emanations of light to achieve spiritual transcendence. The specifics of which we explained in the previous section regarding their customs of planting trees for the birth of their children, like we mentioned. That was just one example of their lifestyle that was on a very high level of transcending. The idea that we will attempt to explain now may be difficult to apprehend. We only pray that heaven draws down the appropriate words to best illustrate this remarkable insight. And that is this. Transcendence, going beyond the physical, sounds like a great thing, doesn't it? We want to do that. God almost many times commands us to do that. So it's desirable, but it may come at a price. That is the idea we're going to try to explain in this section of this book. Indeed, one is encouraged to transcend the limits of the physical and connect with the source on level beyond the capacity of the finite senses. You want to look beyond, you want to try to find God in everything you do and connect to Him. The danger in this, however, is losing the ability to come back down to grip with the physical reality that we are nevertheless trapped in. You cannot deny that your body is still here. And you were born, and you're in the physical world, and God has expectations of you also to live in this physical world. Now, priority-wise, we want to prioritize spirituality more, but that doesn't mean leaving physicality behind. It means taking physicality with you on that journey to the best of your ability. And that is one of the central ideas of Judaism, which is unique to Judaism, as opposed to other religions that just spit on physicality. Physical pleasure is just evil to them. Exactly, every mitzvah is like that. Of course, tefillin, one of the most spiritual things. The Sefer Torah, where does it come from? The skin of an animal that eats, that poops, that sweats. That's what you read Sefer Torah on, you understand? And that's true by any mitzvah. Tefillin also comes from skins of animals. But the point is, you take it, you process it in a spiritual way that upgrades it, right? But that's one factor. The other factor is that we're going to try to explain in this chapter is not just the physical things that you're elevating, but the people around you, because not everybody's on the same level. There's people on different spiritual levels, and most people, laymen of any community, even though they could be religious people, keeping Shabbat, mitzvot, everything, most people are more dipped, more invested, I should say, in the physical world than the spiritual. So the question becomes, for those people who are not that, those people who are more invested in the opposite, in the spiritual world rather than the physical, who should be the leaders of these communities, how should they interact with most people? That is the journey that we're going to try to discover in this section.
How should the leaders who are more spiritual
interact with those who are less spiritual, basically?
Why are we saying the leaders are more spiritual?
By default, that's how it should be. Ideally, right? Ideally. You want to appoint the rabbi of a community should be someone to look up to, someone who is already well established spiritually. Someone who's prioritized spirituality over physicality. But at the same time, doing that in itself is very hard. But once you've done that, a new test arises. That is the test of leadership. And the test of connecting to those who are below you. Because you can't forget about them. And the Torah commands you on several places to interact with other people at a certain on a certain standard. So that's what we're going to investigate here. Let me just do one more paragraph. So again, I digress sort of, but let me just read what we have here, because these words were thought about for a long time to put them down together in the proper way. Indeed, one is encouraged to transcend the limits of the physical and connect with the source on a level beyond the capacity of the finite senses. The danger of this is losing the ability to come back down to grip with the physical reality that we are nevertheless trapped in. One of the major obligations of one's development is not only to connect with God in an otherworldly spiritual sense, but also to connect with others down here in the physical world, with those who are lower on that ascending spiritual ladder. Too much focus on self-perfection will result in a detriment in the connection to the crowd. That is really the theme of this section. And we're going to give you plenty of examples in depth and proofs and connections to all places in the Torah for this idea. Let's stop here, because the next thing we're going to go, again, we only did a page. This is going to be a while. This is 10 pages of this section, but I don't mind, because I think it's very, very important to go through these ideas. B'ezrat Hashem, next week, it's, you know why? Because the introduction takes like 10 minutes. I gotta somehow shorten it, but I don't know how. Hashem should help. Baruch Adonai Olam. Amen. Amen.